Hey, hope that everyone is having a good day today. A lot of people, of course, who watch this channel are familiar with the videos that I do and the connection that I have creating history related content, and may not know that in a previous life I created content in another field. Actually, for several years, co-produced a TV show on the Sportsman Channel. It was a hunting show. Most people, if you've watched the channel long enough, you can kind of pick up that I'm a bit of an outdoorsman. If the deer over my shoulder hasn't clued you into that, well, then I don't know what to say to you. Anyway, in my time in the outdoor industry, uh, met a guy and became friends with who was then the owner and publisher of Bear Hunting Magazine, a guy by the name of Clay Newcomb. Uh, Clay has gone on to become part of the MeatEater Network, has a podcast called Bear Grease. And we're going to be talking about, I don't know what we're going to talk about today, honestly. We're going to be talking about all kinds of different things. I'm going to go ahead and bring in Clay here. Clay, man, I appreciate you jumping in here on really kind of short notice.
Yeah, man. Hey, anything for you, JD.
Yeah.
Anybody that knows me from my previous life at Bear Hunting Magazine is like an old friend. Most people, like, I have to explain to them. Like, the intro you just gave was like more accurate than what most people do. Like, former publisher of Bear Hunting Magazine, Bear Grease podcast. So no, this is fun.
So I've had people suggest to me at times that they're like, hey, all the places that you've been and that you've traveled and all the history you're into, you should write a book. And I tell them that I don't know that I'm qualified to even write a trifold brochure, but I will tell them that I do have some published work in the July August edition 2015 of Bear Hunting Magazine. I did have an article in there, as you can see right there, from a hunt that we did together in the Ouachita Mountain Range in Oklahoma. A lot of people, when I haven't hunted bears as much as you have. I've hunted, I've killed two, one in Quebec and then one in Oklahoma. And when I tell people that I've killed a black bear in Oklahoma, they look at me, they're like, what?
Yeah. That was a fun hunt 10 years ago this fall,
Yeah.
I guess.
Can you believe it's been that long?
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's zipped by pretty fast. So you've gone on and you, as I mentioned before, part of the MeatEater Network and have a podcast called the Bear Grease Podcast. I'm going to ask you the same question that I know you've been asked 100 times, but this is largely an audience that is probably kind of disconnected from hunting. Where does the name Bear Grease come from?
So Bear Grease, the Bear Grease is a metaphor for our podcast. Bear grease is an actual physical substance that would have been used. Bear grease is the rendered fat of a black bear, which, and here's the metaphor. At one time, I would predict that 95% of Americans could have told you what bear grease was because it was animal fat oils were used often. And today, probably 1% of the American population would know what bear grease is. Our podcast is titled Bear Grease because we tell stories that are forgotten but relevant about rural America. And there is some overlap in a way, JD, with what you're doing on your YouTube channel here, in that a fair percentage of our Bear Grease podcasts are history related. We specialize, or we focus in on a lot of historical characters that in some way have hunting in their background. Our podcast is not always about hunting, but it usually has some overlap. For instance, we've done historical series on Daniel Boone, did a big 3-part series, like 3 hours on the life of Daniel Boone. We've done a series on David Crockett. We've done a series on Tecumseh, the Shawnee leader. We've done a series on Osceola.
Hmm.
the Seminole leader. And we've done historical podcasts on some more obscure characters in history, like the George McJunkin of the Folsom Archaeological Site, who the former enslaved guy that basically found one of the most influential archaeological sites in American history while he was out riding his horse, and was this unknown character. But George McJunkin, we did a fascinating series on a Mississippi guy named Holt Collier, who was also a former enslaved guy that became a really successful market hunter and actually guided Teddy Roosevelt on the hunt in Mississippi that created the teddy bear. And so we do some historical stuff. We do some modern stuff. I mean, I interview modern people. It's hard to really pin down exactly what Bear Grease is, other than that it is a storytelling podcast focusing on rural America. And but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that, I mean, I know that your podcast would probably be classified as a hunting podcast, but when I listen to it, I feel like I'm listening to a history podcast that's telling just these old American stories. And you mentioned the story about Holt Collier. I loved those episodes where you talked about him, because that was so fascinating. Because, I mean, Teddy Roosevelt is one of my favorite American figures, much less favorite American presidents of all time. Can you tell that story about Holt Collier and that hunt with Teddy Roosevelt?
Yeah. So Holt Collier would have been, he was born in the mid 1850s, and I believe this hunt took place in 1902. So Holt would have been around 50 years old, and he was a market hunter in the deep South for black bear, using horses and hounds to hunt black bear. And at the time, the swamps of the Mississippi Delta would have been full of black bear, and would have been some of the last parts of America that were really civilized in a way, or, infrastructure and people living there and farming, because of the flooding of the Mississippi River. The first levees of the Mississippi River, well, the big government levees didn't happen until the late 1800s. So, I mean, that whole place just flooded, and it really was a jungle. Holt Collier was market hunting for the railroad, the expansion of the railroads into that part of the world after the levees were starting to be built. And Teddy Roosevelt wanted to have an old South bear hunt. There was this mystique about hunting in the old South. And he had contacted a guy down in Mississippi that was a big political figure. And that guy said, there's one man that you need to go bear hunting with, and his name is Holt Collier. And so Holt was just this eccentric character, fought in the Civil War for the Confederacy. When he was, I take that back. He was born in 1849, because he was like 14 to 16 years old during the Civil War.
Okay.
Like, he was too young to fight, but he rode with part of the cavalry. Pretty crazy story. And but Roosevelt comes down. It's a huge nationally publicized hunt that our sitting president is going hunting. There was no cell phones and communication back then. So when the president went on a hunt, I mean, he was gone for like 14 days, but the press went with him. And so every day the press is taking pictures, coming back into an area that had telegraphs, and we're reporting back to the American press that then is going into all the newspapers. And basically they're given like a day by day, play by play of Roosevelt's hunt in Mississippi. Well, the hunt didn't go as planned. The bear hunt was tough, and they couldn't get Roosevelt like on a bear. A bear hunt with hounds is like lots of moving around, and dogs bay a bear, and you got to run through the swamp on your horses and try to catch this bayed bear. And anyway, Holt Collier was separated from the president. His dogs had bayed a bear. He has a lariat rope, like a cowboy lariat rope, like you'd rope a calf with. This true story. And if you're a bear hunter with hounds, you'd realize this is a doable thing. It almost sounds impossible. From his horse, he ropes this bear that's being bayed by hounds, ties it off to a tree, literally has the bear tied to a tree, rides back to the president and says, "Sir, I have a bear for you to kill." Roosevelt goes with him, sees that the bear is tied up to the tree, and Roosevelt refuses to shoot the bear, which actually in the hunting world is like a really pretty cool moment, because this is right during the time when there's a transition from market hunting to what is not, I don't like the terminology, but sport hunting. And ethics were starting to come into play in hunting, modern ethics. Market hunting, you took an animal any way that you possibly could, the more the better, and you sold it to pay for your groceries.
Yeah.
Sport hunter, no seasons, unregulated, nothing like what we do today. Roosevelt was a part of the group of people that started to introduce fair chase, and that you only take the older mature males and leave the juveniles and females, and you wouldn't take an animal that was in some kind of situation that gave you a massively unfair advantage, like being tied to a tree. And so Roosevelt refuses to shoot the bear. The press hears about it, writes back, and within days, there's cartoons all over the country of Roosevelt with a little bear tied to a tree, and the fact that he wouldn't shoot this bear. Somebody in the press starts calling it Teddy's bear. And soon enough, Teddy's bear. And then somewhere on the East Coast, somebody has the idea to make a stuffed teddy bear that they market using that name. And it goes worldwide, goes global. And today, a child in America, and really a child anywhere in the world, if you show them a stuffed bear, they say teddy bear.
Teddy bear.
I mean, it almost just seems like, well, of course it's a teddy bear. It's a teddy bear. But then when you actually learn where that teddy part of the bear comes from, and you realize it goes back to a bad to the bone dude named Holt Collier who roped a bear, tied it to a tree. Then the president, out of fair chase ethics, this new idea, denies shooting it. It's just a wild story,
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably know the basics of the whole teddy bear story, and that there was a bear that was tied up to a tree and things like that. But I'd be willing to bet that most people don't know the Holt Collier part of that whole story. Now you mentioned market hunting. So my grandpa, he was born in 1927 and grew up, during the Depression, dirt poor, like a lot of people. And I can remember him telling me that he can remember when he saw his very first whitetail deer. His mom woke up him and his brother and said, "Hey, come here." And they looked out in the field, and there was this doe that was way out in the field. And I still live, close to where that old homestead was. But nowadays in my area, I mean, I got deer showing up in my backyard. There's deer everywhere. He told me when he was growing up, if somebody found a deer track on their farm, that was like big news all over. That'd be like somebody finding a rhinoceros track or something like that. That's how it was talked about. Whether it's deer, turkeys, bear, bison, I mean, we very nearly lost a lot of our wild game in this country. And a lot of people may not understand that it's actually hunters that played a large role in bringing those game populations back. Can you talk a little bit about
Man,
some examples?
It's such a fascinating story. And I think in generations to come, people will tell this story that maybe aren't even that interested in hunting, because it's one of those stories that you think you know what the bad guy and the good guy is.
Yeah.
But it's like it kind of just gets flipped around, because in the 1800s the first hunting regulations in America started to appear in the late 1800s. So, America became a country in 1776. So let's say for 100 years, for generations, there were no regulations on wildlife and hunting. And many parts of the country had vast amounts of wildlife, from the bison to deer to turkey to the furs, everything. And people made a living hunting. There's records in the meat markets all over the country. I mean, could have gone to a meat market in Memphis and bought bear meat by the pound right by the pork, chicken, and beef, and that would have happened everywhere. You could have bought ducks, wild ducks. You could have bought deer meat. So it was hunted as a commodity. Finally, late 1800s, Teddy Roosevelt, along with a bunch of other people. Roosevelt gets most of the credit because he became president, but it was a cultural shift that Roosevelt grabbed onto and steamrolled ahead just by who he was. But I mean, it wasn't all him. But these guys started transitioning the culture as they began to believe that all the big game animals in America were going to go extinct, overhunted. Yeah. Bison were almost completely gone. Mule deer almost completely gone. Whitetails all over the country, were just almost completely gone. Turkeys, I mean, just everything. And then those guys started to say, we got to have hunting regulations. And then all the states started catching on, saying, okay, we're going to have seasons. We're going to develop hunting regulations. But the hunters were the ones who said, we got to stop market hunting, and we have to institute this idea that, like, the common man would have incentive to want there to be wildlife. And this whole idea of fair chase, this idea that we let we target older mature males and let the juveniles and females go. And there was this conservation movement that started to move forward, starting in the around 1890s, 1900s, and all of a sudden, hunters started being the ones that wanted game regulations, that started relocating animals to different parts of the country. Like almost every state in the country had some kind of white-tailed deer relocation sometime in the 1900s. Mm-hmm. That was done by hunters. They would catch deer in places they had deer, bring them to places they didn't. They did that with turkeys. They did that with wild sheep. They did that with elk. Yep. And the crux of the story is that the motivation for the people that wanted wildlife on the landscape, was actually doing something about it, was people that were motivated to want to hunt them. And there's this thing that we say that to me is like really interesting, but wherever an animal has cultural value through hunting, it and its habitat will be protected. And so you can't have wildlife without habitat. Hunters started being the ones that were protecting habitat and wild places from development. Roosevelt, my story's kind of jumbled here, JD, but Roosevelt instituted the Forest Service in what year was it? 1905. And the Forest Service was this organization that managed these big tracts of land. And basically, we shifted from a market hunting mentality to a sport hunting mentality, which a sport hunting mentality meant very regulated bag limits, science-based management, and habitat being preserved. And in America today, we basically have about 640 million acres of public land. which is wild lands owned by the American people. And that idea is, we have more public lands than any country in the world. Like, there's no other model that's quite like ours. And that's, to me, connected with wildlife. A lot of our wildlife live on American public lands. This is something that was saved because of our love of public lands. But that's a big spin, JD. Is that kind of where you want me to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a lot of people. Again, this is not exactly the world that I'm in right now with this channel is not exactly a hunting world. So I'll jump on a live stream like this, and people will see, the deer behind me, or I might make a post every once in a while where I'm out in the woods turkey hunting, or doing whatever. And there are some people who, and I'm not being critical here, just don't understand it, and have this perception that hunting is actually an act of cruelty. So how would you respond to somebody who kind of has the worldview that hunters are just like, you should just enjoy nature and watch nature? Why would you want to go and kill this animal?
Yeah. Well, first of all, hunters are the good guys that want animals on the landscape. Number one, the last thing that a hunter wants is to go out into the place that he hunts and not see a deer, to not see a bear, to not see a turkey. Like, we have a motivation to have them on the landscape. And to the people that would say that we need to be uninvolved in wildlife management, I would say in a respectful way that that's pretty unrealistic in a world like we live today. I mean, when pre-European settlement, when there were, I don't know how many million people were here before Europeans got here, but let's just say exponentially less people on the continent then than there is now. Today, I think we're approaching 340 million people in America. Sometimes I think I've heard, I don't want to say how many, I don't know how many Native Americans there were. No one really knows, but much less than today. You get what I'm saying?
Sure.
Today, with the amount of civilization and wildlife habitat degradation, you have these pockets of habitat. In those pockets of habitat, all animal populations are designed to expand. And I'll talk about bear management. I'll use that as an example. A healthy bear population expands by 10% per year. So if you have 100 bears in the population, on year 2, it's going to have 110 bears. On year 3, it's going to have 100, and that calculates natural mortality. It increases by 10% per year. And if you have limited amounts of wild lands with healthy bear numbers, there is an excess of bears that need to be taken out of that population every year to cause that population to be stable. Like, many of the places in America right now, they have bear populations that are to capacity for the habitat, if that makes sense. Hunters come in and take the excess. And we're also selective in the animals that we harvest. Usually we're targeting older, mature males that have already contributed to the gene pool. I mean, it's really pretty fascinating. But I would just say all animal populations expand. And when we have limited habitat, they're gonna increase to the point that they need to be managed. And another thing is that what people wouldn't understand is you can take that 10%, and with deer, sometimes it's even more than that, out of a population every year, and it's like ecologically inconsequential. Like, it's not hurting the population in any way. And then we have this robust culture here in America that, to me, goes all the way back to the first Americans that ever set foot on this continent, in this deep lineage of eating wild game, the most healthy, and to me, the most sustainable use type meat that we could ever have. I mean, man, wild game is the rocket fuel of the planet. I mean, it's organic, free range, sustainable. And so, you know, there's this crazy idea that's just been marketed to many people that, you know, a hunter is just some ego chest thumper that like wants to kill an animal just for the sake of dominance, or, you know, whatever this, man, that is just the furthest thing from the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, the people that I know that hunt, we love to hunt. We do. But we love wild places. We love the animals that we're after. We truly do. And the one animal per year, the you know, that we take out of that, like a bear. I usually kill about one bear per year.
Uh-huh.
Man, we cherish that meat. And so, you know, and we build this culture around it, you know, that's really unique.
Yeah, I would agree that, you know, hunters are a net positive for wildlife. So for example, I've got a family farm. It's about 200 acres. I could very easily tomorrow call up a realtor. I could have that place subdivided and I could make a load of money off of that place. Instead, I keep it wild. I actually pour a lot of money into it every year, putting in food, you know, managing the timber, and basically creating a sanctuary and a haven for these wildlife. And in exchange, yeah, I take 1 or 2 turkeys, 1 to 2 deer off of it every year. Now somebody in the comments was throwing a little shade here earlier. And that Clay is low-key flexing over JD's bucks with the moose antler. So the term, you touched on it a little bit, the term trophy hunting is kind of a loaded term. Like I'll hear people say, you know, well, I don't mind if people hunt, but I don't like trophy hunting. And I heard you give a really good explanation one time, because trophy hunting, you know, kind of goes back to Teddy Roosevelt. And a lot of people, when they think trophy hunting, they think of this billionaire who's flying in on a helicopter. He hops out, shoots something, and then gets back on his helicopter and leaves, or something like that. Well, in its proper form, what is trophy hunting?
So that we'll go back to that transition period when we were transitioning from market hunting to modern sport hunting and wildlife management. And in market hunting, there was no discretion on which animals were taken. You know, people were killing males, females, juveniles. Like if they were bison hunting, they were just killing them all. If they were deer hunting, there was no selection process. When Roosevelt and the Boone and Crockett Club started in 1889, and basically it's a hunting club, and they created a system that quantified the size, antler size of antlered game, skull size of some of the other game, that quantified the size of animals. And that today is what gets so much bad press, is, oh, these guys are killing a deer just so they can have a big number, which in the hunting world, like if you killed a deer, like JD and I would know, yeah, oh, that's a 150-inch deer. That's like we kind of have a number. But again, it's such a great story, because what they wanted to do was they wanted to incentivize the culture and the people and us inside of it to harvest the older, mature males that had already contributed to the gene pool, and to let the juveniles and females go. And before that, there was no real like quantitative way to say what a big buck was. Boone and Crockett did. They said, this is a big buck, and here's how you measure it. And they did a masterful job at marketing all that. Like that moose antler right there, we could score that moose antler, and I could spout out a number, and somebody that was around moose would be like, oh man, that's a big one. Yeah. People often think that's an egotistical thing, but actually what it did was save North American wildlife by taking the emphasis off the females and young and putting it on the older age class animals. So to me, the highest use of me as a hunter is to be very specific in the animal that I take out of the herd. And the best one to take out is the oldest male. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of, and there are, you know, trophy hunting, just so many things in life really are all about marketing and how it's been portrayed to us. And I mean, when I hear the word trophy hunting, I'm kind of, it kind of sends a chill up my spine. I don't like the sound of it.
Sure.
But because of this image of somebody that is just shooting an animal just to get horns or an ego chest thump. But actually, trophy hunting, targeting older, mature males, is what saved North American wildlife and put a cultural emphasis to all of us. Like if me and JD were out in the woods and a little buck and a big buck were standing beside each other, we're shooting the big buck every time.
Yeah.
And part of it's because we like big horns. But the reason we like big horns is because for the last 150 years, 120 years, our culture has valued big antlers. But the genesis of it was to let the little buck grow, let him express his genetic potential in the genetics of the herd. And so it's beautiful. It's actually really quite perfect, But as in everything in life, and when you deal with humans, there's people on every side of the spectrum. There's guys that do helicopter in and shoot a big elk and helicopter out and never process the meat and take the horns home. That guy exists. I don't know him. Yeah. I mean, all the people that I know are like, we like to shoot a nice deer, no doubt. But, most people are doing it for a lot of really good reasons that are positive for wildlife and wild places.
Yeah, those numbers also served as a scientific measurement as well, didn't they? Yeah. So like this deer right here, for people who wouldn't be unaware or who are unaware with the process, you basically measure all the antlers. So you'll measure, get my finger in the right place here. You'll measure like the main beam and the tines and the circumference, and you add it all together. It's a very simplified way of explaining it. So for a buck, in the spring and summertime, when they are eating, like those nutrients are going into antler production. So a buck that is producing large antlers is in an area where he's getting proper nutrition. He's got good habitat and things like that. So these numbers, even though it has, maybe become an ego thing for some people, it also is a scientific measurement that hunters are using because they want healthier populations, healthier deer, healthier bears, all kinds of things like that. In addition to, all the stuff with conservation and things like that, I would also argue, I'm sure you would as well, you talk about this a lot on your podcast, that hunters are kind of like a living link to the past and to our history. Last summer, I was in England for a big World War II festival thing. And there were some guys there from England and Wales, and we were all talking. And a buddy of mine mentioned something about me hunting. And these guys were completely fascinated by it and just kept asking me questions. And they were looking at me like I was Jeremiah Johnson, just, come out of the mountains or something like that. Couldn't believe that I'd killed a bear with a bow and, all kinds of stuff like that. But we're super fascinated, when I started explaining different things about the connection that hunters have to history. Now you take this to a level that I don't. In what ways do hunters kind of provide that link to our past?
I just think that for a human to go out and gather meat by his own hands, whether he's using an atlatl dart or a bow and arrow or a modern rifle today, he's got to have the knowledge of the land, the knowledge of that animal, and it's really it's a primitive human act. I mean, there's in today's world, there's so many things that we do that is not like any human has ever done before. I mean, like a live stream on YouTube. JD is hundreds of miles away from me, and we're having a in-person conversation. This has never happened before, JD. But so much of our life is like that today. We drive in cars, we fly in airplanes, we buy food from the grocery store. Man, hunting is like this primitive human thing. And when I shoot a bear, shoot a deer, that feeling, that dopamine release, that spiritual connection to a wild place that, you know, I believe is real. This is the same feeling that, you know, the first Americans that came to this continent when they killed a bison or woolly mammoth. I know they had that feeling. I mean, it was different. Like the context of their life was different, but in that moment, it was the same. I guarantee you, they were excited. They knew that they had sustenance for their family for the winter, and I just think there's this chain that just can go right back to those people, you know, that we as hunters get to partake in, and it's a really cool thing.
Now, okay, so not everybody is going to be a hunter. So for somebody who, I don't know, lives in Philadelphia or San Francisco or something like that, like why should they care about hunting and some of these pieces of, you know, these wide open spaces and public ground? Somebody who is like genuinely disconnected from that, why should they care?
You know, so much of American identity is wrapped up in wild places. When Europeans first arrived here, they were coming from Europe, which was so much older than anything in America in terms of like architecture and roads and buildings and governments. And I mean, now there had been a human presence here for thousands and thousands of years, which I don't want to minimize that in any way. But America, as it began to develop its own identity, what we had was wild lands. And the first American artists were painting wild lands, while the artists in Europe were painting towers and buildings and pastoral scenes of like civilization. You see, like we were celebrating wild lands from the very beginning. And that became part of the ethos of what it meant to be an American, was that this place was this big, vast, wild continent with just incredible natural resources. And so I think in the heart of every American, and I think that the polls show this, is that Americans, more than other people, well, I might get in trouble, poll differently than a lot of other people in the world for just like really valuing wild lands.
Yeah.
And so somebody that lived in the inner city, that has maybe never been on public land, maybe never hunted. That is a tough one, JD. I guess I would say they are an equal stakeholder in American public lands just as much as people that use it every day.
Mm-hmm.
I think many people in their lifetime at some point will go and enjoy American public lands, whether it's a trip to Yellowstone, whether it's a trip to the Shenandoah Valley or Smoky Mountain National Park, or even a trip to a local state park where they can in some way connect with nature. And that's the beautiful part of the human's natural connection to wild places. It's scalable. You could go in your backyard and sit under a big tree in the city and connect with nature in a meaningful way. And yesterday, a few days ago, I saw a giant tree in the middle of the city, and I had to walk by it, and I just looked at it for a while and just thought, holy cow, this living thing is just a masterpiece. Yeah. And I just had a little moment. Nature is scalable. I've also been in some of the most wild lands in Alaska and had that same feeling that I had under that tree. And so, I think part of what many of us who enjoy wild lands and hunting, tell the world is that it is therapeutic to have some connection to wild places. And as far as why somebody would be motivated to save hunting, that's kind of a tough question. Mm-hmm. Other than it's part of our just heritage as humans on this continent. It's something that anybody has a pretty reasonable chance of getting involved in. Barriers to entry they can be big for some people, but probably not as big as you think.
Right.
There's a lot of programs that mentor new hunters. There's probably public land a lot closer to you than you think. And yeah, that's about the best I got, JD.
Yeah, and you don't even have to be a hunter to, enjoy, these wide open spaces. I read a book earlier this year, and you'll have to forgive me. I can't remember the name of the principal players involved, and I can't even remember the name of the book, but it was about the early efforts to save what became Yellowstone National Park. And in the book, you really get a sense of how close we came all these generations later to almost losing that spot. Like there were people who were already like staking claims, and they were going to build this and they were going to build that, and they were going to turn it into like this big theme park type thing. And thank God for the people who stepped in and took the steps necessary to protect those places. Now, I as a general rule, I stay away from any like political issues on this channel. I think a lot of people, I'll get comments both ways. I have some people who think that I lean far to the left. There's some people who think I lean far to the right. And to me, that's a good sign that I'm, keeping it pretty neutral.
Yeah.
But there's been something popped up lately that is just really, really hard for me to ignore, just because of the connection that has with history and some of these wild places. And I'm going to just bring this up. Now you can find this on a number, oops, hitting the wrong button here. Share screen on a number of different websites. The one that I'm going to share in particular is off of the MeatEater website. There's been a whole lot of talk, recently about what is being called the Big Beautiful Bill. And as it has got into the Senate, there have been some things that have been added to it that honestly have been concerning to people on both sides of the political aisle. I've seen just as much outcry from Republicans as I have from Democrats, from conservatives, liberals, and everything like that. And it's this provision to sell large swaths of public land. And I'll put some links in the description as soon as this is over, where people can go and check this out for themselves. I've got a feeling I know how you feel about this, but let me hear what you got.
Yeah, so this is just popped up, and let me just describe. I'll just describe real briefly what I know about it, so people might be a little more informed and be able to take action if they so chose. But this is in the budget reconciliation bill, this big beautiful bill. Utah Senator Mike Lee put this in. He's the one that's kind of headed the charge and taken a lot of the brunt of all of our ilk towards this thing. But it's in section 301 of the big beautiful bill. And basically the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, which are two major landholders of federal public land all over the country, that totals around 640 million acres that are owned by the American people. Basically, this new bill is mandating that they sell a 0.5 to 0.75% of all their land, JD. That's the bill. It's like you have to sell, and that ends up being about 2 to 3 million acres they have to sell in the next 5 years. And as I understand it, when you see that it says 250 million could be sold, what that means is that they're just saying, hey, 3 million has to be sold in the next 5 years. Each state will decide where they want that land to be sold. And so for the next 5 years, it'll be 3 million acres, which, I mean, sounds small when you realize they got 640 million. And you're like, oh, you're only selling 3? That's not a big deal, except for that in the last 100 years, there's been nothing like this. Like
Yeah.
it sets a precedence for selling public lands that, what's to keep them 5 years from now to go, okay, now you got to sell 20 million. And then, 20 years from now or 12 years from now, they say, you know what, let's sell off half of American public lands. American public lands have been this thing that has been a sacred cow to us. Forgive the expression. But I mean, like we have said as a society, public lands are important to us. They're valuable to us. They're so meaningful to us. You can't sell them. Don't sell them.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to come in and say, let's sell them. And Mike Lee and a lot of them have said, if you read about it and really learn about it, they're saying that they're selling it for the purpose of housing, remediating the housing crisis in some of these Western cities that are surrounded by public lands, which can be an issue. Like some of these little mountain towns out west, like have all this federal public land right hugged in around the town. But this new bill is like really sloppy, really fast. And the land that's eligible to be for sale isn't necessarily going to even go for public housing. So we could get way into the weeds of how this works, but it's basically in 11 Western states, they have to sell off this 3 million acres. And, there's this idea that it's going to, it's going to reduce the American debt, which is something that I think every American's probably concerned about. But golly, to sell off a one-time asset and the amount of money that's going to be generated from it, in my opinion, is like, it's like picking up a grain of sand off of the seashore and saying, yeah, we did remove that grain of sand. And so it's just, it feels inconsequential to really some of the budget issues, but there are people, and I don't understand them, in the world that just don't really value public lands.
Yeah.
And me and the people that I know do. And I think I live in Arkansas. But I feel like, the public lands out west, I absolutely feel like that my voice should be heard inside of that, because these are federal public lands owned by every American. And the main thing is that once you sell it, privatize it, they're actually, they would put these up for auction to just be like sold to the highest bidder, basically. And so, I mean, this land would then become private, and there's some language in the bill that says it would have to go towards like affordable housing, but after a certain period of time, it could go to anything. So like,
yeah,
this is the most valuable land in America. I mean, this is like very valuable land. And so it's hard to imagine that this land is actually going to be sold to people that, common people like me and you, JD. I mean, this is going to, like, big corporations are going to be buying.
Go to BlackRock. And
oh my gosh, it's going to be crazy. And so, but what you need to remember that I believe is true is that once you lose it, you never get it back. And it sets a terrible precedence for this thing that has really defined America, going back to like the earliest identity of Americans, like in our art and in who we were, was we said, we don't have big, beautiful buildings, but we've got wild places.
Yeah.
And that's still true today. And so I think it's pretty short-sighted.
so I'm going to play devil's advocate with you here. Here's some of the pushback that I've seen. One is the argument that the land that will be sold, it's not going to be like real scenic land. It's not important land. It's just a place where we can put a house. What would your response be to that? It's not the scenic stuff we're going to sell. We're just going to sell, something out in some flat country.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this new bill, see, it's so complicated because 10 days ago, JD, we were talking about something completely different. Like there was a bill that got shot down, or a section of the bill that got totally shot down. This new one that we're talking about today, Section 301, as I understand it, makes eligible almost half, a third to a half of all American public lands to be included in that 3 million. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like there's a mandated 3 million acres, but you could pick your million if you're Utah in a huge area. So it's like, who knows if they're going to pick. I mean, they're going to sell places that people want to buy. And I mean, how do you look at a 10 million acres of land and say, what's the least pretty or what's the least value to someone? That land has value. I mean, this scrubby public land that I've got around my house, most people wouldn't think much of, but to me and my family, it's like, it's very important to us. So
that was kind of my question when I heard that argument or that pushback. I'm like, okay, who's the one who is assigning value to this? Who's the one who is looking at it and saying, oh, this is ugly ground, we'll sell this?
Yeah.
Which then again, you're like, okay, why are you going to sell the ugly ground to people? So there's a couple different things there. Another piece of the pushback that I've seen, and this would come from people who take issue with the federal government or big government. They're like, man, the federal government owns way too much land. Why should they have all of this land that the states can't do anything with? They should. Basically, this is a way to poke big government in the eye.
Yeah, man, that's a tough one because that's an ideology that I think. I mean, there's a lot of conservative people, including myself, most of the time that say, yeah, big government, it'd be nice if it was smaller. But I think it goes back to what do we really value? And I mean, I think as a society, we've proven for the last 250 years that we value these public lands. And I mean, everything comes at a cost, and I'm all for a trim government, but I want a robust arm of it to be public lands. Like, to me, it's like, okay, we got to keep that, because the most limited resource really on planet Earth is wild lands.
Yeah.
I mean, period. It's like, you aren't getting it back. Once you pour concrete over it and put a road through it and put electricity in it, and let barring an apocalypse that changes the earth, which I think could happen. I mean, like, you're not getting wild lands back.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's something that we could say, yeah, I hear what you're saying about inflated government. This is not a place to deflate it. And I think when you look at the actual, and this is where I'm not an expert, but I think if you looked at the actual amount of money that's going into all this, you would realize that even if you trimmed the federal lands budgets like way down, it's still not really comparable to all the other stuff. So it's kind of like an easy thing to poke.
Yeah.
But it's really not the most effective thing to poke if you're actually trying to reduce debt and reduce the size of government. That's my opinion, JD.
Man, I'm a small government guy myself. I think the government that governs best is the one that governs least. So the people who have that opinion also seem to have the opinion, and I think rightfully so, that the federal government is quite wasteful with taxpayer dollars and things like that. So my question then becomes, if this is a wasteful government that is irresponsible with our taxpayer funds, why would we want to sell off our public ground and take that money and give it to the federal government that we're complaining is so wasteful? That doesn't seem like a good trade-off to me. I think there are better ways that things could be done.
I like that. I'm going to use that, JD. That's next time I talk about that, I'm saying that.
So what can guys like me and you do?
I think we just got to throw a fit, man, in the places that we can throw fits. And by throw a fit, I'm speaking metaphorically. We need to contact our senators, our lawmakers, and just let them know. I really think that's all we can do. I mean, I've seen a lot of people on social media, just people that aren't influencers, just people putting up on their social media, hey, I support American public lands. I think this is a bad idea to sell them. I think
from
that
all sides of the political spectrum too.
every side. Yeah, this is not, man, it's just not a political issue. It's not, I mean, it's not like, well, only the Republicans are doing this or only the Democrats. It's, I don't see it being that way at all. And so I think just in your sphere of influence, make a statement about it. And but mainly contact your senators. And man, sometimes we hear that so much, contact your senator. And, you send an email to them, you get a form email back. You call them, you talk to some receptionist, that's 25 years old and takes down your note, and you just wonder how effective it is.
Yeah.
But I mean, barring you have the cell phone number of your actual senator and you can text him or call him, I think that's what we can do, and just give social support, so with social media today, the mood of the nation is set by people's tone on social media. And when I see JD say something publicly, it empowers me to say something publicly. Sometimes that can be negative, but in this case, it's positive.
Yeah.
And so I think we just got to put pressure on these people just to say, hey man, this is not something that we can get behind. And it's supposed to come to, I heard that this bill was going to be on the president's desk by July the 4th. That's what I've heard. So 10 days. I don't know what day it is. It's the 20th.
Yeah, it's the 20th. Yeah.
Like 2 weeks from now, maybe this is all going to go down. But I think it actually is got to get approved in the House next week. So time is of the essence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, hey, we're coming up on an hour here. I appreciate you jumping on here and talking. I want to have you back on sometime and tell some more stories.
Man, thanks, JD. Good to talk with you. I really appreciate what you're doing on your channel, man. It's really great.
All right. Thanks, man. All right. So there you go. If you aren't familiar with it already, man, the Bear Grease podcast is definitely something that you should have on your rotation. Clay's a great guy, just a great modern American storyteller. So be sure to subscribe to his podcast. You can check out stuff on the MeatEater YouTube channel that involves Clay. And also, hey, if you feel so compelled, drop your senator an email or phone call or something, and let them know that we want to protect these public lands, kind of in the spirit of Teddy Roosevelt. All right, well, have a good day.